then. They said, no, you're already dead.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So Pam and Lanny are on audio. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and I don't know of anyone else that's on audio. Is that correct? No, okay.
That's correct.
Exactly the way I thought it would be.
Tell
Okay.
them who's here.
Yeah, tell
Yeah,
Pam Lanny who's here.
Well, I'm here. This is Mike. And Miss Susan is here. And Paul and Fran are here. And Luke and Ann are here. And Lanny and Pam are there. But they're here.
That's right.
How does that work? Okay. And
That's better than mask.
so before we move on, I did a little PowerPoint presentation, but it's just to kind of keep us in line is all. It's nothing major. You know, I guess it's been almost a couple of years now. We started this Sunday school lesson, Game of Thrones, and it was meant to help us walk through the history of the kings, or the history of Israel, looking at Israel from 4 different perspectives, what I call the thrones, which would be the priestly throne, the prophetic throne, the royal throne, and then finally the eternal throne. Now, all of them are kind of interwoven with each other throughout the history of Israel and throughout the writings. That's why when we read the Kings and the Chronicles, we hear about this prophet doing this or this priest doing that, and of course when we get into the prophets themselves, we definitely have an eschatological and end times eternal throne kind of element there, and so we've kind of done that, and the ultimate goal is finally reaching that eternal throne, the full realization of the eternal throne. And I've got something special for that when we get there. We have, like I said, we've been doing this a while, and we are a whole lot further than most people think. Where we are in the timeline, let me go ahead. I'm gonna share a screen. Y'all can't see it, Pam and Lanny, but I'm gonna share the screen here. Share.
We keep reminding you of what you're not seeing.
Right. It'll be on the video. Okay. So let's move this up and out of the way here. Okay. So this is just a refresher of where we're at. Okay. So these are the kings of Judah and Israel. I know it's kind of hard to see for those of us in the room, but those at home will be able to see this pretty good. It lists the kings of both Judah and Israel, and the reason we separate them out is because when Israel called for a king after the time of the judges, Israel wanted to be, sorry to say this, they wanted to be just like everybody else. They wanted a king. And so God gave them a king. And who was that? Saul.
Ooh.
Well, he wasn't all that bad. You know, his family was rich. They had money, which means they also had power. Do y'all know what made them rich by any chance?
Donkeys.
Donkeys. They were donkey farmers and raisers. So, and it's kind of funny because one story has Saul as a young boy. He was supposed to be tending the donkeys of his dad, and they disappeared on him, and so he freaks out, and he takes this one of their servants with them to go searching for these donkeys. And they've been gone several days. They only took enough food for a few days. And so they've been gone several days, and he ain't been able to find them yet. And so the servant says, well, you know what? I know of this guy just over the hill who is a seer. Now, we find out very soon thereafter that seer is actually the prophet Samuel, okay, who is an old man at this point. And so anyway, they go to Samuel, and Samuel listens to their story, and Samuel, looks at Saul, realizes who Saul is, who he's going to be. He's going to end up being the king, and he says, "Look, don't worry about their donkeys. They're right where you left them. And in the meantime, the donkeys have gone home because the donkeys know who feeds them. So So I did this as a report in one of my classes there in seminary, and I ended it with Samuel told them, I'm trying to think of how I said this, but they're right where you left them. Your asses are behind you.
Always look
Right, yeah, always look behind you. The asses are back there. So anyway, so Saul becomes the first king. And anybody know how long he ruled? It's really simple.
40 years.
40 years.
It's always 40 years.
Right. What have we learned about the number 40?
You're all over it today.
And what have we learned about the number 40?
Biblical. It's a lot.
It happens a lot, and there's a reason for that. The reason is 40 doesn't necessarily mean an exact number, although in some cases it can. It just means a long time.
Generation.
It just means a long time. So it's just a general number for a long time. And so Saul, using his power, is a military genius. And he is able to extend the lands of Israel further out. However, he goes against what God wants him to do. God didn't want him to be a military might. He wanted him to be a leader who pointed the people towards God. So then comes along the next king. Who's that? David. And of course, we could go all through David. So 1 Samuel is all about Saul. 2 Samuel is all about David and him growing up, okay? And then becoming king. Where we started in this class was the very next book, which was 1 Kings. 1 Kings and 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles kind of parallel each other. But there's one significant difference. 1st and 2nd Kings are written from a general standpoint. 1st and 2nd Chronicles are written from the standpoint of the southern kingdom of Judah. So 1st and 2nd Kings have more in it, but 1st and 2nd Chronicles get more specific when it comes to Judah. And of course, it ends earlier because, it extends past the kings because of where the northern kingdom gets taken out first, but Judah remains for a while. So David becomes king. How long does he rule?
Oh, maybe 40 years.
40 years! There we go again, a long time. Okay? And David was a man of God, with a few exceptions.
Yeah, a few errors in
He's
there.
human.
He was human.
Things happen. We won't get into that because where we started our class was the next king, and that was Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Solomon was not David's firstborn. Anybody know where Solomon fit in? Of course, we know David wasn't the firstborn either. Anybody know where he fit in?
He was the youngest.
He was the youngest of seven brothers.
Yeah.
Okay? Solomon was.
Bathsheba's son.
She was Bathsheba's son, but anybody know?
Was he the seventh son?
He was the seventh son of David, but the second son of David and Bathsheba.
Right.
And the reason being is because of the sin that David committed with Bathsheba, their first son died. So Solomon becomes the second son of Bathsheba, but the seventh son of David. And what happens when David gets old and is getting ready to pass on the throne, he makes this deal, if you will, with Bathsheba and tells her, like I said, they make this deal that Solomon is going to become the heir to the throne. However, that's not the way things were planned with the rest of David's family, because his oldest son, Abijah, his oldest son, Abijah, thinks that he is going to be king. And so as 1 Kings starts, we get this dual coronation as Solomon gets the big one and Abijah goes down just outside the city limits and has his own, in addition to planning the overthrow of Solomon. Well, it doesn't work out for them. Solomon becomes king. for how long?
40 years.
40 years. So the first 3 kings of Israel, 40, 40, 40. That's easy to remember, okay? So Solomon is a king for 40 years. And what is Solomon's claim to fame?
He built the temple
He built the temple.
And wisdom.
and his wisdom.
Right. So as he gets older in life, his wisdom imparts that we want to be at peace with everyone around us. Well, the way they did peace treaties was to marry into the family. So Solomon, instead of marrying off some of his kids, he marries himself off and ends up with how many wives?
40?
No,
7?
300
Oh my
wives.
gosh.
Oh, it gets better. It gets better.
With one. Imagine the 300.
He's more stupid than I thought he was.
But those were his legal wives. He still had concubines. He had mistresses. Anybody know how many of them there were?
No.
700.
Oh,
He's
man.
got 1,000 women telling him what to do.
All right.
I bet they didn't. Off with their heads if they had.
So anyway, Solomon, one of his wives, ends up influencing him so much that he turns to a practice that is an affront to God. And that practice is child sacrifice.
Ooh, that's a biggie.
Yes. And so because of this, Solomon ends up dying after his 40-year reign. And his son, anybody there? Oh, okay. So his son, anybody know who his son was? Rehoboam.
Oh,
Yeah, I know, that's an easy name to remember. Rehoboam. Is that right?
Oh,
Did
yeah,
I get that
there,
right? Rehoboam.
Right there.
Okay. So Rehoboam becomes the 4th king of Israel. Now, usually what happens is you won't see Rehoboam as part of this unified Israel because it was only there for a few months. What happened is Solomon, before he died, he institutes this conscription part of their military clause, where he conscripts people into the armed forces of Israel. But most of them end up coming from the northern parts of the kingdom, because the southern part was where the temple was. It was where the priests were. So you didn't conscript from the priest. And in doing so, he taxed them, because you got taxed based on the number of people that served the kingdom. So that causes a rift in the kingdom. And so Rehoboam, after just a few months, he decides, you know what? I'm liking this tax thing. So
He was a Democrat.
So do we have some idea of the populations we're talking about?
we don't know for
In
sure.
Israel. I mean,
Yeah, we do. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are numbers listed, yes.
So 30,000, 50,000?
No. There were 600,000 when they left Egypt. So they're in the millions by this
Wow,
point.
wow, okay.
Okay. They're in the millions by this point.
In this little desert thing.
Right.
Michael, wasn't Rehoboam the one when he became king? Some advisors said, be kind to your nation and all that kind of stuff. He said, no, I'm going to tax them and do this
Right.
and the other thing. He said, I'm going to be vicious, and he was.
What Rehoboam did was he was fairly young. Remember, Solomon died a whole lot sooner than they had planned because of his sin of child sacrifice. So Rehoboam becomes king, and he's kind of immature. So he takes all of Solomon's advisors, fires them, and makes all his friends his advisors.
Yeah.
And in the process, he says, I like this tax thing. And so he taxes the people even more. Well, that doesn't go over very well. In the north, the foreman of all the work groups, the conscripted people up in the north, they go to their foreman and say, hey, can you see what you can do here? See what you can do here, because we can't survive on this. And so that ends up being Jeroboam. And don't get it confused with Rehoboam. I mean, there's only one letter difference between their names. But Jeroboam goes to King Rehoboam and says, hey, can you back off? Can we at least go back to what your father had? Oh, no. In fact, now you've made me mad. I'm going to triple it. And so the kingdom divides over taxes.
Legitimate reason.
Over taxes. So we end up having the northern kingdom, in which 10 tribes, because that's just where they were laid out, that's where their land was allotted, separating themselves from the southern kingdom of Judah, which was the controlling power, and Benjamin, which really didn't have any power at all because of some issues they had back during the Judges time frame. Their numbers had been decimated in a war, in a mini civil war. And so they really didn't amount to much. They didn't have any power. Judah was the power. So all the other tribes separated basically from Judah, and Benjamin, not having anywhere else to go, stayed with Judah. So you've got this division of Israel, the northern kingdom, Judah, the southern kingdom. And that's basically the 4th and 5th chapters of 1 Kings. Then we go on this 1,500 year, well, not that long, probably 500 years, 600 years, I have to do the math, 600-year time frame in which there's a series of kings. The kingdom of Judah maintains the Davidic line. They maintain a line of successors that belong to the family of David. However, the northern kingdom doesn't set themselves up like that. They make Jeroboam, remember their foreman, the guy who had the guts to go talk to the king, although it didn't work. He becomes the first king, and then it's just a series of whoever can take power after that. There are a few minor little dynasties in there. The big one that we remember is the Omri dynasty, O-M-R-I, because Omri, it was the great-great-grandfather of Ahab. Okay, so that Ahab was the last in his dynasty. Well, I say that. He was the last in his dynasty in the northern kingdom. Because when we get to Ahab, and who's his famous wife? Jezebel.
Oh, Jezebel.
Okay, they had a daughter. And their daughter's name was Athaliah. Now, for all the bad that Ahab was, he really was bad because his wife influenced him to be bad. No, that's not true. He was bad in his own right. But she was right. She was really bad. They set about a way to try to unify the kingdoms. And this wasn't the first time. It had been tried several times. They set about trying to unify the kingdoms of the north and south. And by doing so, how did they do treaties? Remember,
Marriage.
They married. So they took their daughter Athaliah and they married her to the king of Judah at the time. Well, wouldn't you know it? About 3 weeks after they get married, the king dies.
Oh my!
And Athaliah doesn't want to give up power.
Of course not.
She ends up killing all the king's brothers and sons.
Ooh.
And becomes queen of Judah. So there was a queen in Judah, Athaliah, right there. Okay? And she becomes queen for about 2 years. What does that say? 4? I don't think it was that. That says 6 years. There was kind of a political war going on. What she didn't realize is that the youngest son had survived. And the priests, knowing that, hid him away for that time frame. And so at the end of 6 years, I think he was 6, maybe that's, yeah, he was 6 years old when he went into hiding. So at year 12, which is when, in Jewish, that's when you become a man, they present him, the priests bring him out and say, here is your rightful king. And so Athaliah ends up dying and all that. So
I have to tell you John Mayer's story at this point. He said the reason the kings in the Old Testament all died, they had too much iron in the blood. Caused by dagger in the back.
Right.
You just made me think of that.
So don't look at the board just yet. Okay? Look away from the board. But anybody know how many kings there were on each side? How many kings?
20 and 20.
North?
20 and 19.
There were 19 in the north,
Oh.
There were 20 in the south.
Wow.
Okay. How many good kings were in the north?
Oh, 8.
Not in the north, in the northern kingdom
Oh,
of
the
Israel?
north, no, they did a lot of bad
None.
stuff.
There were no kings in the north that were called good.
Wow.
How many kings in the south were considered good?
About 8.
Of course, the South.
8. But
South is deciding who has good kings. And who
7
don't.
or
correct.
Because the South is deciding.
The South wrote the history. Yes.
South wrote the book.
It's 8, but one of them is kind of okay? Because in the Chronicle, I can't remember which king again. I'd have to go back and look at all my notes. But one of the kings is said to be good in one passage, and then said to not,
Oh.
did not follow the way of God in another.
Went to
So
rest with his
kinda
father.
is.
Yeah, they did a lot of that.
And there's a few others that we could probably make that same assumption, maybe all of them, we could make that assumption. But what you have with the northern kingdom is this gradual downgrade of them following God until they have just completely wiped out any knowledge, any wanting to know of God. Whereas in the south, we get more of a parabola, more of an up and down wave as they come back to God because God, please help us. Okay, I help you. All right, we're good. It's all us. Yeah. And we're back down. So and the biggest sin, the one thing that God charged both the northern and southern kingdoms with, that ended up causing their destruction and eventual exile was, anybody know?
Was it worshiping other God?
Yeah,
Well,
turning away
but-
from him.
Turning away
Close.
from God.
But that all falls under one heading. It's pride.
Oh.
They placed themselves.
Leaders or fall.
They placed themselves above God, and that's what eventually led to both sides down. Let's see, where else was I going to go with this? So yeah, 19 kings in the north, 20 in the south. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide. So we've got this. Let me go on here. Okay, so this is after Solomon. You can see, yeah, I know where I was going now. So we've got this divided kingdom. I don't have it drawn out where we have the different tribes, but this dividing line followed this little wadi right here, this little wadi, which is a little river that sometimes is there when it rains, but usually isn't. It's just kind of a gully. But you'll notice where Jerusalem is. Jerusalem is right up on the northern side of Judah. That's where the temple was. Well, as they divided, the northern kingdom realized we've got an issue because
We can't worship at the
how do we get to the temple? We're at war with them.
Swim.
So Jeroboam sets up
Oh, no.
he sets up 2 places of worship. One of them is right here in Bethel. I lost my cursor. Right here in Bethel, which is even closer to the border than Jerusalem is.
Yeah.
And he sets up another one just off the screen here called Dan. So Dan was way in the north of Israel. Bethel was way in the south of Israel. And Jerusalem was right there close to the border too. But not only does he set up places of worship, he gives them something to worship. He creates these 2 bulls. Now remember the last time Israel created a bull.
Oh, they were in the desert.
They were in the desert, right during the Exodus. God didn't like it then.
No.
Well, he sets up 2 of them, one in the north, one in the south. What do you think God thinks about
I
that?
don't think he likes
God
us.
doesn't like that either. So
So where you got bulls, you got BS, right?
bulls are not good to worship. In the priestly realm, the priestly throne perspective of Israel, of ancient Israel, bulls were not meant to be worshipped. They were meant to be sacrificed.
Right.
Okay, so.
Gilded one.
So you'll also see some of these other cities. What I want to tell you is Samaria, Shechem, and Shiloh were all capitals of the northern kingdom at some point. Samaria would end up winning out. That's when Ahab took over. Up until that point, they had had a capital in Shiloh briefly, but Shechem was the other big one early on in the northern kingdom's history. And then when Ahab came into power, Samaria became it, and it stayed there. And of course, Samaria is still a city that exists, even though it got destroyed for a time. And of course, Jerusalem still exists down here. We know all these other little cities down here in the southern kingdom. And the reason for that is when Israel, here, let me go to the next one. When the northern kingdom of Israel, it becomes decimated by the Assyrians. The way the Assyrians worked was they took these sledges and they would run over all the fields, all the buildings, everything would be complete rubble. So there would be nothing for the people to live in. And so when the Assyrians came through, they destroyed all of the land of the northern kingdom. And so that left nothing for the Israelites to do. And so the way the Assyrians worked when it came to the people they conquered, they displaced them and moved them to different cities. And so on this graph, I'm sorry for those that are on audio that can't see this, but on this graph, you'll see that they were dispersed to all these other little areas. All this orange that's here were areas where the northern kingdom was dispersed to. Now, a big contingent of them were sent right here to Nineveh, right here in the center, right beside where it says Assyria. I lost my curve. There it is. Nineveh. And of course, we know Nineveh from the prophet Jonah, the story of Jonah. Now, when you think of Jonah being spit out by the whale, where do you think he was spit out at?
Wow, in the water.
In the water, but where? Probably over here somewhere, probably. So he had to walk across land quite a ways to get to Nineveh. And that's the part of the story we don't ever hear in Jonah. But anyway, yeah, it's that one line, it's that space right between verses. That's,
So looking at this picture, it always amazes me, such a little country like Jerusalem could survive in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Wars going on and all this stuff.
The whole kingdom is basically right here.
That's
This
right.
whole, if you were to make that an oval right there,
That's right.
it's right in there. That's the whole
That's right.
kingdom. The United Kingdom there of Israel. So Assyria takes them and sends them out to all these little cities. Also, we hear a little bit about Nineveh. Remember we read Tobit?
Yep.
No, I'm sorry, Judith. I'm sorry. It was Judith. The apocryphal book, Judith. We read just a few verses, maybe half a chapter from that talked about what things were like in Nineveh. So, well, about 60 years later, Judah, who they survived because they got right with God. They saw what happened to their brothers up in the north, and they got right with God, and so God spared them. And so in that 60-year time frame, the Assyrians lose power to the Babylonians. The Babylonians come to power. And the Babylonians are kind of off to the right a little bit here. Still, you see where Assyria was, what's left of Assyria. Here's Israel here. So you see where Assyria is, and Babylon is right over here. And you'll see that both of these make their land right between the Tigris and Euphrates.
Yeah,
Right.
very fertile, ran in Iraq.
So they've got all the fertile land while Israel is left out here. I mean, they've got a little fertile land there around the Jordan and the Sea of Galilee and all that. But anyway, around 586 BC, Babylon decides, okay, we've taken Assyria, we've pretty much decimated Assyria. We're going to move south. They move south, and around 586, they get to Jerusalem. Jerusalem isn't going to give up. And so what happens is Babylon doesn't work the way Assyria did. They don't just blow up everything. They wait people out. So they put a blockade around the city of Jerusalem for 2 years. Now imagine if you couldn't get out of your house to get food for 2 years or water for 2 years. How well would you survive? You wouldn't. And so by the end of 2 years, Babylon finally, Babylon finally says, okay, we think that they're
ready.
Yep. So they just go in, they besiege the city, destroy the temple, take take everything that was left, because the temple had been ransacked several times already. But they take everything that's left. They take, and what they do is they take the whole group of people to Babylon, right over here. But the way they work, remember I said 2 years or so? They actually came about maybe 8 years before that to make peace. And there was peace. But during that peace treaty, what happened was the king of Judah brings in the king of Babylon, Shalmaneser, brings him in and says, look at all this stuff we have in our temple, all this gold and stuff. We want to be your friends. Well,
thanks.
he goes back, tells the Shalmaneser, hey, you won't believe what we saw.
We got work to do.
And so they come back, they take all of that stuff out of the temple. So this happened many years ago, but also at the same time, Israel, Jerusalem doesn't want to, they don't want that, but they put up a fight. And what happens is Babylon takes some of the kids. They take some of the children. Well, of those children that they take, Daniel, and the three we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, they take them back to Babylon, and they start indoctrinating them to Babylonian ways. Well, thank God, literally.
Yes.
They still have this mentality that God is God, and they're not going to bow to anything like that. So they get raised up in the ways of Babylon, and then 8 years later, when the whole populace gets moved from Jerusalem to Babylon, there was a remnant left in Jerusalem, but that's kind of a side note. The people of Israel get to Babylon, and guess what? The people that they've had placed over them are their own people. And so we start to see connections with the captivity in Egypt, where Moses was a child that was basically taken and become part of the royal family, who then becomes someone who leads the people for 40 years, but, as a member of royalty. And then, of course, we won't get into the story of him leaving. Yeah, we will. He leaves for 40 years, and then God tells him, no, go back and get them. And so that's kind of the same. It's a very close connection there. So that's what happens is the kids get taken, and then when the people come out, they've got leaders that know how to work the politics of Babylon, but also know the God of the people they have. And so wonderful planning by God. I could never have thought this. It just never would have crossed my mind. So
He's a big picture kind of guy.
So where we are in our class right now is it's about 580. The people have been gone for a little bit. Jeremiah is he's the main prophet.
Right.
He was there when Jerusalem got captured. The Babylonians gave him the choice. Okay, you can either go into exile or you can stay here. Take your pick. He decides to stay. And so he sees the turmoil that undergoes the remnant that is left there, the people that are left there, because they have no temple to worship in. Pretty much all their food stocks, all their cattle, all that is gone. They've got to rebuild some of their infrastructure for water. So the people that are left are destitute. And Jeremiah decides to remain there and remain destitute with them. Now, Jeremiah is this wonderful prophet. He was smart. Instead of him sitting down and writing all his stuff out, he had a secretary that did that. Baruch. Baruch, B-A-R-U-C-H.
Close enough, government board.
And Baruch wrote wonderful things. In fact, some of Jeremiah, we believe, wasn't even written by Jeremiah or transcribed or said by Jeremiah, but was Baruch embellishing.
So the good news was Baruch wore a short skirt. The bad news he was a man.
Well, he worked. He worked and worked hard. He had dedicated himself to making sure that the words of God through the prophet Jeremiah were saved. even to the point of rewriting them sometimes,
Right,
because
right,
the king, the kings of Judah who didn't like me and told what to do would take them and burn them. So he would rewrite them. Okay? So anyway, Lamentations is one of these things after the exile. Jeremiah, he has seen, and Lamentations is the book we're in right now. It's part of the prophetic writings. It's basically Jeremiah part 2, if you will, but it's poetic in that it has 5 chapters, and it's kind of set up in such a way. I think I've got the next is the book of Lamentations. Yeah, it's set up in such a way. Chapter 1 is this point where woe is me, this is what's happened. Oh gosh. And then chapter 2 as well, you deserved it. You got what you asked for. And that's where we're at right now, is in chapter 2 of Lamentations. And then, of course, when we get to chapter 3, we get this message of hope, which all prophets do. There's always a message of hope somewhere. And then, again, we get to chapter 4, which is, you got what you deserved. And then chapter 5, which is, woe is me again. So it's kind of a bell curve, if you will, that, if you were to put it in a mirror, it would look the exact same. Okay. So we are in chapter 2 of Lamentations. And we're going to try to get through chapter 2 in about 10 minutes here. I think we can, but we'll see how far we go. It's only 22 verses, and we don't have to discuss it very much.
There's not much to discuss.
Well, it's pretty self-explanatory, a lot of imagery. So in Lamentations chapter 2, can everybody read that? I know y'all can't, Pam and Lanny, but
I can.
okay.
I can't quite
So
see it.
if
Read it to them. Read it to them.
okay, you want me to read it? I can read it.
Sure.
Okay. So Lamentations chapter 2, verses 1 through 22. The Lord has covered daughter Zion with a cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendor of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Without pity, the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath, he has torn down the strongholds of daughter Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonor. Well, we're getting this message of, this is what God has done. And it doesn't sound good. But remember, this is Jeremiah lamenting. He's in pain. His heart is in pain.
Lamentations.
In fierce anger, he has cut off every horn of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand at the approach of the enemy. He has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire that consumes everything around it. Like an enemy, he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe, he has slain all who are pleasing to the eye. He has poured out his wrath like fire on the tent of daughter Zion. Now, I will comment here, the beginning of chapter 4, you see it says, like an enemy, he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Now, that seems like something else is coming. He's pulled back, but he ain't let the arrow go yet. So, I don't know what that means, but I know what I've seen. Verse 5, the Lord is like an enemy. Ooh, how would you like to have to describe? You get to the point where you describe God as an enemy. You know that Jeremiah is feeling really low at this point. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces and destroyed her strongholds. He has multiplied mourning and lamentation for daughter Judah. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed festivals and her Sabbaths. In his fierce anger, he has spurned both king and priest. Aha! So now we get two of those thrones listed here, in the royal thrones and the priestly thrones. But we need to look specifically here. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed festivals and her Sabbaths. Now, those were commands by God that they were to follow.
Right.
For God to take those away, what would you think that means to you as a people?
You're gone. You're gone.
We're no longer God's people.
Yeah,
That's right.
no identity.
So this is some very powerful imagery and words here.
Yep.
Verse 7 here. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has given the walls of her palaces into the hands of the enemy. That abandoned his sanctuary. God has chosen not to live among the people anymore. Ugh, I hate to think that.
Right.
He has given the walls of her palaces into the hands of the enemy. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of an appointed festival. Verse 8, the Lord determined to tear down the wall around daughter Zion. He stretched out a measuring line and did not withhold his hand from destroying. He made ramparts and walls lament. Together they wasted away. So Jeremiah here mentions a measuring line. God set about this plan of destruction, and he followed it to the letter. God made a promise and kept the promise. It wasn't so good for Judah, but it is ultimately good, as we know in our own lives. It's ultimately good in the will of God. Things don't always go the way we want them to, but it goes exactly the way God wants them to. Verse 9, her gates have sunk into the ground. Their bars he has broken and destroyed. Her king and her princes are exiled among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets no longer find visions from the Lord. The elders of daughter Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have sprinkled dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. Excuse me. So now we're talking about not the kings and priests, but we're talking about the different elements of people, the different demographics. The elders sit in silence. The young women bow their heads. Oop, where did I go? There we go. Verse 9, her gates have sunk into the ground. Oh, I read that, sorry. Verse 11.
Yeah.
My eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, where is bread and wine? As they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their lives ebb away in their mother's arms. Now he's talked about all these other people. Now he's talking about himself. My eyes are failing. I can't bear to keep them open to see this. Verse 13, what can I say for you? I'm sorry. Excuse me. With what can I compare you, daughter Jerusalem? To what can I liken you that I may comfort you, virgin daughter Zion? Your wound is as deep as the sea. Who can heal you? The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The prophecies they gave you were false and misleading. Now Jeremiah he's saying out loud to himself, I have done everything I can. I don't know what else to do to help you. But you didn't want to listen to me. You listened to all these false prophets. You listened to all these other people who told you, no, fight back, when you should have capitulated, things like this. And so right when we hear about the prophecies I gave you were false and misleading, we're not talking about the prophets of God. We're talking about false prophets that entered and told them what they wanted to hear. Verse 15, all who pass your way clap their hands at you. We learned how to clap today, didn't we? But they scoff and shake their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? All your enemies open their mouths wide against you. They scoff and gnash their teeth and say, we have swallowed her up. This is the day we have waited for. We have lived to see it. We've lived to see your death. The Lord has done what he planned. He has fulfilled his word, which he decreed long ago. And what was that? I will bless you, bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. All you have to do is keep me at the forefront. But they put themselves at the forefront, and God did exactly what he told them what he would do. He has overthrown you without pity. He has let the enemy gloat over you. He has exalted the horn of your foes. The word horn means power, okay, in almost every circumstance. The hearts of the people cry out to the Lord. You walls, O daughter Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest. Verse 19, arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint from hunger at every street corner. Look, Lord, and consider. Now, after all this, he's poured his heart out. Now he switches gears and begins, okay, God, look. So, look, Lord, and consider. Whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their, talk about imagery. Should women eat their offspring, the children they have cared for? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? Young and old lie together in the dust of the streets. My young men and young women have fallen by the sword. You have slain them in the day of your anger. You have slaughtered them without pity. As you summoned to a feast day, so you summoned against me terrors on every side. You talk about PTSD. Jeremiah has PTSD. In the day of the Lord's anger, no one escaped or survived. Those I cared for and reared, my enemy has destroyed. And so we've come to the end of chapter 2 of Lamentations. It's pretty powerful.
Wow.
Jeremiah has hit rock bottom, literally.
Yeah.
And even in rock bottom, chapter 3, which we'll get to next week, we've got hope. Because God always gives hope, even when we can't see it.
So this was hell.
Pretty much, yeah. Their area code or their whatever it was 666.
Yeah, 666.
Their phone number began with the prefix 666.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
So
you
next-
can't look up until you're down and can look.
Yeah.
it's hard to
It's hard to
It's
look
hard
up
to
when
look
you're
up when
going
you
down.
place
That's
yourself
the way it
so high.
works. That's the way it
Yeah.
works. That's the way it works.
So for all those who are online, we thank you for being here today. We will close this for today, and next week we will start again about 10:40, give or take a few minutes there, depending on when the service ends. But for those that watch this later on, this is not live, please look for the Zoom link that will be sent out through the office later this week. And as always, this will be loaded up onto the church website. That's the plan. And also to the church Zoom page. That way, those who miss a week or something can always come back and hear God's word in a classroom setting. Okay? So go with God. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.